Hey guys, before we get started, I want to let you know that we are not doing this podcast to sell anything. This is simply for educational purposes. So, YouTube reviewer, if you're seeing this now, let me tell you, we are not selling anything, simply for education. Thank you. What's up, guys? Welcome back to Think Big Bodybuilding Media. I'm Scott McNally. And guys, normally, as you know, we do a bunch of, obviously, bodybuilding content here. This is going to be a little bit different. So if you're tuning in for the gun content, let me introduce myself. My name's Scott McNally, and I've been coaching competitive bodybuilders and people who just want to get into better shape for over a decade full time now, and well longer than that. I'm hanging out here with fellow bodybuilder Peter McNulty. He's the owner of East Coast Iron Gym and the owner of Northeast Munition. So he knows an awful lot about the topic we're going to talk about today. Peter, I had to bring you on, man. I've been asked in about the last couple weeks 3 times by bodybuilders, what's the best concealed carry for bodybuilders?
We're going to tell them. We're going to tell them all about it today. So this is exciting. I know we've been talking about this for a while, just going back and forth on social with gun chat for years now, actually. So we're overdue.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, too, congrats at NPC Nationals this past year. You looked incredible, man. Like, you've really pulled your physique together. That was hands down the best you've ever looked.
You know, it's thank Andrew, because that's all I need to say. That was all Andrew. Anyone that says the athlete does all the work, nope, Andrew saved the day on that one.
He did the cardio?
Thanks a lot. He did everything. He held my hand through the whole thing. So thanks a lot, though, Scott. It was a great experience. I'm really excited about it. So on to the next one. But I'm excited to talk about guns on this podcast. I mean, I listen to it every day with you guys, so it's a cool change of pace.
Hell yeah. So, guys, I do have to say, too, I've learned about a ton about guns from Peter. So if you are from the 2A community and you're just happen to stumble upon this, if I say something that you don't agree with, then you can directly blame Peter. Just assume that he taught it to me, and then we can just all troll Peter in the comments. That's the route we'll go. No, we'll keep it pretty simple here. So for starters, I thought it would be a good idea, or we thought it'd be a good idea to put together a criteria. Like, what are the things we're looking for in a gun? Specifically, in this case, we're going to be looking for something specifically for concealed carry. And some of these guys and girls who are listening, they may be brand new to guns. So what would be our criteria, our list that we're going to try to put these guns through their paces, and then we're going to start showing some firearms?
Cool. So on a broad spectrum, what I look for when a customer comes in the door, they're looking for a carry piece. You got to look at a couple big bullet points. The first of which is the size. Second of which is the capacity. You want to keep in mind user serviceability as well as aftermarket support. You want to take into account cost. That's important for a lot of us. And reliability for the most part. So, I mean, if you can nail down those 5 or 6 check boxes, you are going to be in a pretty good spot. So, I mean, there's really only 2 that outshine everything at this point. And I know you favor one, I kind of favor the other. So it's been kind of a friendly debate for a little while, but I've got kind of a top 2 for us for what we sell the most of and what we recommend the most of. First and foremost, you already know which one this was going to be. And as we discussed earlier, everything is clear, safe.
Yes.
We've checked all our chambers prior to.
And I should have told everybody, guys, from the start, YouTube people, we are not selling anything on this video. In fact, I should probably drop this in right at the beginning. There is no sales of anything going on here. This is simply for educational purpose. That's all. I had to throw that in.
Absolutely. So this is a Glock 43X. So, and as we discussed, it is very clearly empty. There is no magazine. There is no obstructions in our chamber in the form of ammunition. So this is a Glock 43X. It's my favorite carry gun for a myriad of reasons. So we'll start with our list. So basically we get down to cost. So I think it's reasonably priced rather. It comes in at like $485. So it's south of $500. Most of us can save up $500 for a very important component. And, you know, you're getting a piece of military grade hardware. You're not buying on a budget at that point. So to spend $500 and get something in the upper tier of the quality spectrum, I think is a really good value. Capacity. So factory capacity is 10 rounds. They have aftermarket magazine. I know. So there's other guns that that beat this one out from an OEM perspective. You do have to go aftermarket to get the big 15 round magazines from Shield Arms. It does incur an additional expense of like $50. So that is a little bit of a downside. But, you can end up with 15 rounds in a very, very small package with the Glock 43X. It's, big brother, so to speak, is the Glock 48. Kind of notable mention on that one. Makes for, basically, they have the same grip, but the Glock 43X is slightly shorter, whereas the 48 comes out a little bit longer. Some people like it for concealed carry because it doesn't roll over the belt line as much. It anchors itself a little lower in your pant line. I personally I'm a midget. I'm like 5'5". I pull my pants real tight. I don't worry about it. So I love the Glock 43X. When you get into the reliability argument, Glock is the quintessential. I think it is a little played out. I think a lot of guns are reliable at this point, but they're kind of known as the most reliable, piece of hardware in the game right now. And I'm inclined to agree. I've been in this industry for like 15 years. I've sold hundreds of thousands of these guns. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you I have never sent one back for repair. They do not break. I've taken maybe 50 courses with these guns and I've never broke one. I've had a Glock 19 that I actually put tens of thousands of rounds through, and I actually got rid of it because I stippled it myself and it got really ugly and I couldn't take looking at it anymore. Yeah. But it was never a mechanical problem. So aftermarket support's our next one, and user serviceability. So if you go on YouTube and spend 90 seconds, you can become a master armorer of a Glock. With a roll pin punch, you can take this thing down to the 20-something parts that exist in it, and you don't need any special equipment. You don't need any special knowledge. Half a brain in a roll pin punch, and you are a Glock master armorer. So as a product of that, the aftermarket support's huge. Everyone always refers to them as the Honda Civic of guns. You could literally buy triggers, barrels, optics plates, anything you could think of that they make for a firearm. There's 1,000 companies making them for Glocks. So I always tell people Glock is the boring choice. It does everything at like a B+ level, but consistently. The cost of ownership, which is also a component to the cost, is pretty important to me as well for like cheap magazines, cheap OEM parts, cheap aftermarket parts. So comparing it to, I know your favorite, which is the Sig, and there's a million derivatives of the Sig. And again, empty chamber, no magazine inserted, we're safe.
Oh, wait, what do I got here? Hold on. So, yeah, that was my carry gun. So that's what I'm carrying now. I did start with that, Peter, and I will tell you, man, I carried this gun for a number of years. I am not a fan. It's okay, but I struggle with it. I got the Sig in my hand, and that I absolutely freaking love that gun. Like, just absolutely love it.
I agree with you, and that's why, like, I consider them my top two, but they're Ford Chevy as far as I'm concerned at this point. They're both such incredible firearms. I like the Glock simplicity a little bit. So when you take the same criteria list and you apply it to the Sig, right? So you start with cost. It is a little bit more expensive out of the gate and it depends because there's like 15 variants of the 365 starting at $499, which is still more expensive than the Glock, all the way up to the one you just showed us, which was $1,000+. So they get rather expensive. Sig is considered to be a little bit of a premier brand. Their pricing kind of reflects that, but credit where it's due. They put a lot of thought into the ergonomics. If I were to be objective, they're better triggers. They feel better in the hand. They're just kind of prettier overall. They've got cool styling to them, so I can understand why there's an extra incurred cost. In terms of capacity, this particular model is what they call the XMacro, which comes factory with a 17-round magazine, which does beat the Glock 43X out of the box, and you don't have to go aftermarket for it. In terms of like size comparisons, let's see if I can juggle these. They're basically identical. So you're getting a few more. Similar. Yeah, you're getting a few more rounds out of the Sig. So, I can completely understand why you favor the Sig. If I'm being honest, I shot a Glock 19 for a decade before the small guns came out. So I was like rightfully steered in that direction because I had so much seat time behind the Glock 19. And when I mentioned Glock simplicity earlier, what's nice about them is they're basically all the same. Sig has like 70 different pistols and they're all built different ways and they've got a lot of different configurations. Glock, when I say they're boring, they build everything the same.
So if you know the 19, then the 43X is going to be similar to the 45 to everything else.
It was an obvious transition for sure. So if you happen to be searching for a carry gun and you maybe are already shooting a full size Sig, maybe you're going to be more prone to go with a 365 variant. And same for if you're already shooting a full size Glock and you're watching this looking for advice on a carry gun, you might want to think about going with, the same in its smaller counterpart, because you're just used to the familiarity of the item as it is. You're going to probably be better out of the gate with it. But the Sig, meets the capacity for sure. It definitely, for aftermarket support, it's not quite there with the Glock, but it's pretty close. I mean, especially because they have a different type of setup where they have what's called they're these modules that are serialized that are inside, so it allows them to get different grip frames and all different parts for them, which the aftermarket has really latched on to. It's a newer gun. Glocks have been around forever, the 365, even though I couldn't tell you. I'm gonna shoot a guess. It's probably been out for like 6 or 7 years now, which sounds like a long time, but it's really not, because Glock has had guns out since like the 80s. And they haven't changed much. So the aftermarket has had an easy time building tons of stuff. So Sig, the aftermarket's catching up in a major way. There's a lot of companies that are backing them. OEM parts are relatively available. Sig does a good job at supplying you of all the OEM parts you need, and they'll ship them to you, which is good. Unlike a lot of other manufacturers, when I bring up the category of user serviceability, it's really important because a lot of manufacturers won't ship you parts to fix your own gun. So if you're reliant on this carry gun, you might be out of a gun for 6, 10, 12 weeks if you have to ship it back. So why I like Sig and Glock and why those two are my 1 and 2, one of the main reasons is you can work on them yourself. Nobody wants to have a carry gun down for 2 months.
Yeah.
And, and in terms of, reliability was another category. It's Ford, Chevy. They're both incredibly reliable guns. I will say Sig had some growing pains over the years, which there's going to be a lot of people in the comments, I'm sure, that say, don't drop it or whatever. I get it. And I'm not going to pretend like that doesn't, resonate with me. And if we're just speaking openly, part of what my Glock bias is that I've seen a lot of problems with SIGs over the years. They've had time to work out the kinks. Their 365, as far as I can tell now, is flawless. But we had a lot of issues with them when they first dropped that line. Whereas in my experience as a retailer, and this is just my personal experience and my opinion, but when Glock drops a new model, we never have any issues. When SIG drops a new model, you kind of might want to wait till a Gen 2 or 3 for them to work out the kinks. That was kind of why I steered away personally.
I've got a question for you. So a couple questions. I was going to ask this about the Glock before. The Shield magazines. I've heard there were issues with some of the earlier productions of them. I know Honest Outlaw has carried, I think he carries an M&P mostly, but he has carried a 43X, and he said when he does, he just carries the 10-round mags because he doesn't trust the Shield mags. But from what I've heard, the newer versions of the Shield mags, the 15-round aftermarket magazines for the Glock 43X are okay now.
So as far as I can tell, yeah. So, I can only go by my personal experience, and from a retailer and a shooter, I can tell you when the first gens came out, they were trash. And I've been selling Shield arms since the company came out. And the first gen, and I wish I could tell you time frames. I'm really bad at that, so I couldn't tell you. It was pre-COVID when. Sorry about the C word.
It's all right. You can say it now. They aren't as sensitive as they used to be.
Gotcha. But pre that era, we had some problems with the Shield mags. I think there's been like 5 or 6 revisions. I think they're officially advertising that there's a Gen 1 and 2. But in the last 2 years, I bought a bunch of my personal Shield arms mags 2 years ago. They've been flawless. I've sold at the shop maybe thousands of them, and I haven't had issues with them in years. I respect where it's due. These YouTubers that are the real deal that shoot, there's a lot of them, like you mentioned, that say, hey, these things don't run. That's just not my experience with them right now. I've had great luck with them in the past couple years. I carry one in my EDC personally. So I feel pretty confident in it. I put a lot of rounds through my shield mags, and we sell them every day. I mean, I go through a couple a day at the shop, and we don't have any come back. That's not to say that they're free from any issues, but just not in my experience. I will say I prefer an OEM magazine. I wish Glock would do a factory 15 round magazine.
Yeah.
But because they don't, I mean, again, we'll give the nod to Sig on that one. But, you know, we have to take what we get at that point, right? And I know you wanted to mention like a notable mention, which is, you know, important because we went over cost. And I think there's, you know, it's important, you know, to me anyways, as a retailer, when someone comes in, not everybody has a lot of money. And I'd like to see everybody be able to protect themselves, protect their family and loved ones. And there are some options out there. Yeah, our budget option is a staccato. Specifically, I'll one up you.
Ooh.
So you can buy an
That's a
XC. I don't know, $6,000 or so, all said and done. So
It's
so
like
this is our
cost of a car, guys. Cost of a car.
It's our budget friendly option. So
Yeah.
you know, there's
This is not
there's
an
a ton.
XC, but I love it. I love it nonetheless.
Yep. I'm a huge fan of staccatos. They also make some smaller guns that are beautiful, but you know, they're not super budget friendly. They come in at $2,500 to $3,000, and you still got work to do with red dots and lights and lasers and gizmos. So in terms of actual budget options, I'll be honest with you, and I wouldn't have said this years ago, the Taurus series, the G series, has been pretty solid over the years. I mean, there's a lot of good with this line now. I mean, 5 years ago, if you came in and said you wanted to buy a Taurus, I'd tell you to renew your health insurance policy and be ready. You know, maybe you come in short a few fingers in a couple months, but now they've done a good job at essentially building a Glock. You know, they're very Glock-esque, and they're inexpensive. You know, they come in at like $250, $300, so they meet a lot of what we like. You know, they're the right size. They range in different sizes. They have like a carry, a compact, a full size, but they're anywhere from like 13 to 17 rounds, just like the Glocks and Sigs are. They're like $250 to $350, depending on which variant you go with, and you know how crazy of a sale Taurus is running that month because they tend to blow them out every now and then.
Yeah.
But if you only have that much money, you know, I've got no reservation with you picking up a Taurus. I mean, some of these things have really, especially on YouTube, there's been some torture tests on these guns that have been phenomenal. So,
Nice.
you know, I would say if you can afford a Glock or a Sig, they'll treat you really well. If you can't, something like a Taurus or a Ruger would treat you pretty fair as well. And we haven't seen many issues with them over the years as of late. You know, way back when, different story. But I think in the days of modern machining, I think people just get it right. And I think a lot of these companies realize that it costs them some arbitrary small amount of money to produce a gun, but to get a bad, you know, if Scott buys a Taurus and it blows up and he goes on Think Big and talks about it, they might lose 1,000 customers over it. You know, it's not the old days where you know, there was no YouTubers with millions of followers that could really smash your company up over a bad review. So I think these guys are taking their QC a little serious these days.
Yeah. Got a question for you, a couple questions then. So another thing I know we wanted to talk about was red dots and optics ready guns versus not optics ready. Would you recommend, because you see that term, this gun is optics ready, what does that mean, and do we want it?
Yeah, so that definitely comes into the aftermarket support end of the checkpoint we talked about earlier. You know, the ability to put a red dot on a gun, I think, is absolutely, you know, a non-negotiable in my world. And hypothetically, even if it's not in the budget this week or you kind of have your reservations, let me just start by telling you you're wrong. Red dots are the answer. So if you don't know it today, you'll know it tomorrow. So get a gun that's equipped with it. And the reason being is, you know, Glock, for instance, if you bought a Glock red dot ready versus not red dot ready, you're talking a difference between $30, $40, some small amount of money. If you were to have to do it later, it's going to cost you hundreds of dollars to have a machinist cut it and recode it, as well as weeks without the firearm. So I'm a big red dot supporter. You know, especially those of us have older eyes, you know, that don't get to train as much as we used to. I mean, I used to shoot a lot and I don't shoot that much anymore. I'm on the road a lot. I'm working a lot. So I can pick up a red dot firearm at almost any point and be pretty ready to rock with it. Whereas iron sights to me take a little bit of a learning curve. You know, if you've been shooting for 25 years with iron sights, maybe it's a little harder to break those habits. But it's like I always tell people, when you're competition shooting, red dots are a different class because they're unfair. Like the world records are set with red dots. They don't let you compete with a red dot in classes that don't allow it because it is literally an unfair advantage. Like they are faster scientifically in every way.
Yeah.
So when it comes down to like compatibility, I think you're going to find most modern handguns will come red dot compatible. The Glock and the Sig that we like, they're both red dot compatible. I know both of us have red dots. I'm personally running on my carry gun the Trijicon RMR-C, which isn't my favorite after quite a while of testing it, but it's a great product.
Yeah, that's what I have too. We did talk about that. You were going to move to a Holosun. Now, I remember a few years ago, you were like, yeah, Holosun is kind of a secondary quality brand, but you don't feel that way anymore.
No, I mean, Holosun has come a long way. And part of it is that in the gun industry, and I know you've seen it in bodybuilding, like there's a lot of fly-by-night stuff that happens, right? This company comes up out of nowhere, they're the hottest thing for a couple months, and all of a sudden they fizzle out. Some YouTuber ruins their company, or they go on the internet and some PR disaster occurs, and the next week they're not cool anymore. So I always give a company kind of some time to prove themselves. I gave Holosun years, and we were selling their products early on, but I was a little hesitant to recommend them because I didn't have personal experience with them at the time. We're talking like 5-6 years ago, but it used to kind of be you ran a Trijicon or nothing. If you couldn't afford a Trijicon, you were, up Schitt's Creek without a paddle. And now, there's some really great budget options. So I don't even know if I'll classify them as budget options anymore because I think Holosun is actually boxing with the big dogs now. So their EPS carry, I'd put it up against anything on the market right now. I'm going to switch over to it. I've got some guns that have it. My everyday carry does not, but it probably will soon. But, Holosun can get you into a red dot from anywhere from $250 to like $400, whereas a Trijicon now is starting at like $550 plus.
Yeah.
So huge price differential. So yeah, so I'm definitely down for the Holosun stuff. I mean, it turns out they do a lot of OEM work for a lot of other companies. They've been around for a long time. They're a really big company, despite what people think. And they produce some of the best optics I've seen in terms of red dots. With magnified stuff, I'm not there yet, but with carry gun optics, like all day. Especially now that, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of the RMR-C. So I wish I went with the EPS carry. But yeah, I'd say that, the nice part about most of the guns we've talked about is that they come compatible with red dots. Usually, to those unfamiliar, it's kind of a plate system, and I'll show you on this guy. So you see these two screws on the bottom, right in front of the rear sight. Basically, you unbolt that, and there'll be a plate that you put on that you can bolt basically any red dot you want to. So if you buy a pistol that's red dot ready, they're fairly compatible with just about anything you could throw at it. So moral of the story is red dots are the answer. Buy something that's compatible, even if you're not going to use it today, tomorrow, the next day, because later you just buy a plate and the dot you want and you're ready to rock. Whereas if you don't buy something that's compatible and you decide that, hey, maybe I made the wrong decision, you're kind of in trouble.
Yeah. All right. So what are some other things that we can think of here? I know like I have another question, but I mean, I know we want to talk holsters. I know that one thing I wanted to ask you is how many magazines would you suggest somebody has for their carry gun? And I'm not saying like how many should you carry, but what's a good number of magazines? Because I've met people that are like, well, the gun came with 2, and so I have 2 magazines, and they look at the magazine as being as important as the gun. Like, this is my goal. These are my 2 magazines that I live with,
My answer is somewhere between 200 and 500. I'm only partially kidding. I mean, as many as you can afford realistically. I mean, magazines are disposable.
Basically.
Literally, yeah. As much as you can store for as long as you can store. I mean, realistically, there's a lot of reasons for it, and we won't dig into the politics or the ins and outs, but realistically, there's political threats of magazines all the time. Magazines are a disposable item. So if you actually train with your carry gun, they're going to wear out eventually. Like, you're going to break them, you're going to beat them up. And you know what? It's just good practice to have extras of just about anything in the gun world. So I have a lot. I mean, I'm not going to tell you how many, but I have a lot of any gun that I care about. I stockpile magazines on. I just think it's a great idea. You'll never be upset that you have too many magazines. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to buy a carry gun and it gets into the cost category, you should probably budget for, a good holster. You should probably budget for at least a few extra mags. I would argue budget for training, because training's important.
Yeah.
And, A red dot, I would argue, is a pretty important thing. But just realize when you buy your first carry gun, it doesn't stop at the 485. You got a $50 to $100 holster, you got a couple $100 in ammo, a couple $100 in training, maybe $300, $400, $500 in a dot, spare parts, spare magazines, a few $100 there. So it becomes an expensive endeavor. But extra parts are pretty important. I mean, there's nothing worse than like having you get 2 mags with the gun, right? And you break one. Right. And you're relying on one. So it's not a great thing. So I'd try to get as many as you could feasibly afford.
All right. Yeah, that was one thing that came to mind. Other thing I just wanted to mention too is I think there's an element of preference here when it comes to picking the gun. Like, look, what feels better to you? But I like, and I'm not saying I don't like the Glock 43X. I carried it for a few years. But then when I got that Sig in my hand, I was instantly good with it. I didn't have to try it. I could easily get my follow-up shots. And if I could go back in time, this gun wasn't available yet, but I would have started with that, That said, I mean, you can always get something and see what you think and use it and run it. And if you don't like it, you could always sell it, get something else, or just keep it and get something else too. What about full-size guns? I mean, sometimes we're talking about big guys. We got guys like Dusty that are looking to purchase now. So, I mean, there's no reason I feel like Dusty, I couldn't carry a full-size gun. Here up in Michigan, I'll carry a full-size pistol like this Glock 45, which is... a 9mm still. Once again, this is empty. But I mean, what about carrying something like this?
So I would say that the same list of criteria we discussed for a smaller gun is going to roll right over into a big gun. We mentioned size as one of the criterias, but we didn't really break it down. Part of why I suggest those two that I suggested is because they tend to meet like 80% of humans, right? Like anyone from like, your average 5'2" female to your like 5'10", 5'11" guy between, let's say 150 and 220 pounds or so is going to be able to carry one of those guns pretty comfortably. The other component is that if it's your first gun, carrying a gun is a new experience. Even the smaller guns feel like a lot when you have never carried a gun before. When you've been carrying a gun for 2, 3, 4 years, or you got a lot of experience, it starts to feel like your wallet in your back pocket, right? Like you kind of forget it's there sometimes. But if you're a new shooter, we tend to steer people towards these smaller guns because they're very easy to carry. But there's always a compromise. I always tell people when we're talking about the size criteria for firearms is carry the biggest gun that that you will carry comfortably. If the size is going to deter you from carrying the gun, then buy a smaller gun. But physics dictates that bigger guns shoot better. You can usually get more bullets into a bigger gun, just sheer real estate. You have more purchase on the firearm to put your hands. And generally, they're just less recoil. The shootability is better. So if you can carry a bigger gun, do it and use all the same criteria we talked about, the same budget, the same aftermarket support, the aftermarket support, user serviceability, capacity. Because what you don't want to do is get this big gun that has 7 rounds in it, right? Like, what's the point? So you still want to take into account, like, get as much capacity as you can out of that particular size. Stay within the confines of things that are red dot compatible, good aftermarket support. And I'd say the same criteria applies. So yeah, for sure. When Dusty wants to get a gun, if you're one of these 300-ish pound guys, then like, I envy you. I wish I can carry this this Staccato XC every day. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is, I'm like 4 feet tall. So I mean, it just doesn't work. But if I could, I would. So to the guys, like Dusty or Ron, like, carry an XC.
I got another one.
It's a no.
Yeah, something we didn't touch on yet, and I think we just glossed over it. So everything we have talked about today so far is 9mm. What about if I'm carrying a bigger gun? Should I be carrying 45? Is there a benefit to that, or something else?
No. So there's a lot of science and there's a lot of opinion and there's a lot of nuance to the caliber debate. The reality is 9mm is just the answer. I'm very biased. It's my opinion. I like to think my opinion is based on a lot of experience and science, but the reality is just to give you the rundown.
2 world wars. 2 world wars.
Well, I'm not built that tough anymore. I'm not storming the beaches of Normandy with a 17-pound rifle. I'm a little bit more fragile for that, so I need every advantage I can get. So basically, in the modern day, if we were talking 5, 10, 20 years ago, different conversation. But in 2025, smokeless powders, projectiles, they've come such a long way. 9mm is plenty lethal, and there's a lot of FBI statistics and a lot of statistics of active shootings that have occurred that really vet 9mm to be more than adequate. It tends to get over the realm of being very adequate as a cartridge while also maintaining the most amount of capacity potential. Yeah. So, like for instance, 380, which, and again, I'm not going to get into like the what's good enough, because someone will come at us and say, well, 22 is the most deadly cartridge in blah, blah, blah. But you know what, like going by statistics that are published, 380 tends to be a little bit less than what is required. And, 40 and 45 tend to reduce your capacity in such a manner that doesn't offer you enough ballistic performance to justify it, in my opinion. So I would say 9mm is the answer. There is a couple exceptions to that rule, and I told you about it the other day. The Bodyguard, the new Bodyguard.
Oh, yeah. So since you told me about that, I've been wanting to get one now.
I'm a tiny guy, and I can fit one in my pocket and literally forget it exists. So that is something that I kind of consider it more of a backup gun. But if you're out walking the dog or something, you want to throw something in your pocket, there was a point in my life where I was like, you need a tourniquet, you need 3 magazines, you need a holster with a belt, and you can't wear sweatpants because you're not tactical enough. But now I try to be a little bit more open-minded to the fact that we got to live a life. So I'd say if you want to throw a 380 Bodyguard in your pocket, there's something special about that gun where it feels like a gun that's bigger, but it's not. Yeah. So there's some exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, to answer your question, 9mm is the answer. And it's just faster too. Like you get into other arguments about, well, 10mm is a great cartridge, and it is. But when you get into I reference a lot of competition shooting, and when you compare a world-class shooter shooting 10mm and 9mm, 9 is just so much faster. And you could be this big burly tough guy and sit at the range and say, well, I can dump a mag through center mass with this 10mm. Great. Can you do it when someone's beating the crap out of you with a heart rate of 180, when you're reaching behind your head trying to protect yourself while drawing from retention? It's just 9mm has the least amount of recoil, most amount of capacity, and it is more than adequate to get the job done. Yeah. So go there. Just buy a 9mm. Don't be different. It's also cheap. I'm pretty frugal. I know you like to shoot a lot, so the cost of training is greatly dependent on the cost of ammunition, right? Because if you double the cost per box of ammunition, your annual training budget's going to go up substantially. So,
yeah, that's a great point.
9mm. All right, and then you want to get into holsters a little bit too, right?
Yeah. Let's cover that one, because that's the kind of the final step, man. You've got the gun, but you've got the gun. You are training with it. You're getting to the range. You're practicing. You're learning. Now, how do we carry it?
100%. So you got your Whackmaster 5000, you get your red dot, you get your light or your laser on it, you're ready to rock. Honestly, that's where I think it's a very subjective conversation. I only have a couple non-negotiables. That's an awesome one. I'm actually pretty in favor these days of the new Safariland rig.
Okay,
it's
what's
awesome. It's based on, and I might butcher this, but I'm pretty sure I'm accurate. It was an old G-code design that I think Safariland somehow acquired the rights to. So It's Kydex, but it's felt lined. So it's a little softer on the skin.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's nice and soft, and it doesn't beat you up too much. But in terms of non-negotiables, I know your holsters fit them. I would say anything that doesn't deter you from carrying the gun, because most people don't carry a gun because they're like, well, it sucks to carry. It's uncomfortable. Find something that isn't. And my only rules are no organic materials like leather, like nylon, none of that crap. Stay away from that.
No, so what do they call them? It's like a squeam kind of thing. The belly band.
Belly band. Yeah. So there are some belly bands that are acceptable, but they're rare, and the ones that are going to follow the same list that I'll give you. So you want a piece of Kydex. So it's a hard material.
Yes.
What is important about Kydex is that when your gun gets hot and you put it back over and over again, because we train with our guns, something like leather is going to break down. It's going to get hot, and what you really want is, this is a Glock 43X. You can't get to that trigger guard no matter what you do. There's nothing I can do to make that gun go off.
Yeah.
You'll notice there's a little red. Sorry, I'm backwards. There's a little red retention adjustment. So what that basically means is any holster that I'm looking at, I want to pass the retention test. So I want to be able to flip it upside down, and I want that gun not to fall out. Why that's important is because when you are in a gunfight, you don't want your gun to fall out of your holster. So whether you strap it to a rig like you've got, which is a really awesome holster, the Filster Enigma is great. They all need to meet at least those broad list of criteria for me. No organic materials, use Kydex, have an adjustable retention component, and also finally just have a good way that you can attach it to you. These are really good clips that Safariland offers. They tend to anchor on a belt really good. Soft loops are also good. Your harness is, basically a safe way to get that thing to attach to yourself that isn't going to come off. Because what you don't want to do is go to rip your Whackmaster 5000 out and be holding your holster, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, what do I do? I'm in a gunfight with my holster, a gun's still in my holster. So that's my holster spiel. Just keep it in there tight, keep the trigger guard, safe, and otherwise just whatever's comfortable enough to carry. I know you like that Enigma. I mean, I do too. I carry that quite a bit.
I love it. I can carry, that's the main way I can carry a full-size gun, because the thing is I wear sweats most of the time. In the summertime, I'm wearing shorts that are, not dress shorts. They're kind of some type of a gym shorts. And, I know that you've also recommended like the Ulti-Clips, which will cinch down onto your clothing. And I do have a holster for the 43X that I do have Ulti-Clips on. I'll throw that on sometimes when we're just going for like a dog walk or whatever, going for, a short, going to the park or something when we're walking. But other than that, I know it's a little bit more work. But since I don't wear a belt, this strap goes around your body. And then instead of interacting with your clothes, because what will happen to me is I get the weight of that gun. It weighs a lot on the waistband. And like you said, you've got to cinch it down or it starts rubbing. And after walking a mile like that, I have issues. But with this, man, I can carry a full-size freaking gun, the Filster Enigma, like on a leg day, training back. I don't care what I'm doing. I can carry my gun with me no matter what. I'm unstoppable. So much so that I was at the range earlier today. I've got another Enigma that I have on right now. That one's for the Sig, and I didn't even bother taking it off. I've been home for a few hours. I'm just sitting here in the house with my gun on, just because I literally didn't think of taking it off, because it bothers me that little.
So if any of you guys are thinking about breaking into Scott's home gym while he's training legs, think again. Because he's on his hack squad appendix carrying his full-size gun, and he's ready to rock. Right in the middle of rep 7 or 8.
Yeah.
Hey, that's awesome. I envy you. I mean, I, on the other hand, throw my gun in my gym bag. I happen to own the gym, which is convenient. So, I'm not a big advocate for off-body carry, but you know what? I can't train legs with even the Enigma, but the Enigma is great. I mean, a lot of us, especially because there's, this podcast is going to go out to a lot of bodybuilders. A lot of us wear joggers and sweatpants and stuff. So it's really nice to find alternatives to wearing a belt, because not a lot of us wear a belt every day. So the Ulti-Clip, which you can find on like Amazon, it basically, and I know the Ulti-Clip, we don't want to get too into it, but basically what it does is it replaces these belt mechanisms. This way. So you can unbolt this, and you can put the Ulti-Clip in its place, and then basically it acts as like a clamp, like alligator teeth that bite down on your pants.
Yeah, and you want the XL. You want the XL. They're longer. They're enough to cinch down onto clothing. So here's the thing: I have done off-body carry at the gym, going out to public gyms, and I've got my gym bag with me. I mean, there are some gyms they don't let you have your gym bag on the floor. Obviously, not a problem for you if you own the place. I still, though, when I've done it, I am very aware. I'm like next level aware that I have a gun sitting on the floor there. If I go to get a drink of water and I'm 20 feet away, I just feel like, I've got a gun that's unattended. You know what I mean?
Yeah. At some point, we'll get into carry strategies and why it's so important to be so hyper conscious of having a firearm on you or off of you, because it's a huge responsibility. But I'm with you. But yeah,
that sounds like you're leading us into a future topic. I like where you're going with this.
In the comments, if you guys don't bash us too bad, I mean, tell us what you want to hear about next. But I think
so
that
much we could talk about. We could talk about We could talk about home defense, which is a whole other story, right? That's a whole other conversation. We could talk about, I mean, God, everything. There's so many things we could talk about. I mean, there's so much to go into with even just carrying, you know. I've had people ask me questions like, well, I think I'll just leave it in the car. And I'm like, oh, there's a lot for you to learn, but you'll change your mind after a while, after you get educated enough, you know.
I find myself, like we've already experienced with Peter's unlimited amount of dialogue. I got a little Skip Hill in me, but we when somebody comes in to buy a gun, I get that. Well, I'm just going to leave it in the car, and I'm like, oh no, now I'm triggered. I got to talk to you about why this is a bad idea for 2 hours. So we can get into a lot of EDC strategies and the do's and don'ts at some point, but sounds fun. But yeah, in a nutshell, I mean, as long as you guys get into, you know, a quality gun that you can carry every day in a safe holster with or without a red dot, you know, I think you'll be good to go. I mean, any questions, feel free to hit either one of us up. You know, like Scott mentioned, Northeast Munitions is our Instagram. Drop us a DM or an email. Any advice, we'd be happy to help. But it's a lot of these decisions are very subjective. And then some of them are just like, you know, you mentioned earlier, like, you know, you like the way a gun feels. And I kind of tell people, I'm like, I kind of have a little bit of not a disagreement in that. I think that's important, but I think if I took any human and trained them for 10,000 hours on a Sig and on a Glock, they'd be really, really good. I think if your equipment is top quality, it's kind of like I always tell people, if I give you the keys to a Lamborghini and a Ferrari and I give you 1,000 hours of training, you're not going to come back and be like, well, you know, this tool is inadequate. You know what I mean?
Okay. I can see what you're saying. My issue is no matter what I do, I feel like this gun is more slippery in my hands. Yeah. And I have a harder time even after a few years of carrying it. And I've probably put it, I don't even know. It's got to be like 7,000 rounds for this gun at this point.
You've got a valid argument because you're a very.
I found that the other one though, the Sig, I just instantly, and a lot of that was that, you know, I've done a lot of shooting since I got the first one, but I picked up the Sig and it was just like, it was like putting on the right glove. The glove fit, you know? You're
right. I mean, when your experience with that gun, like, it wasn't like you shot 100 rounds and said, oh, this one feels better. Like you put 10,000 rounds through that thing and said, hey, I shoot this one a little bit better. So I could totally respect that type of scientific, you know, trialing. You know, the one gun just worked better for you.
I think I need to get, well, like you were talking about too, that EPS carry optic too. I think that might change things because I have a hard time getting on the ARM RCC. It's a little tiny window, folks, that you have to see through there.
Yeah, and it comes down to like all these guys on the internet will say, well, if you present your pistol straight, it shouldn't matter where the dot is.
I'm not as good. I'm not that good then. I like a big fat window.
Well, same. Literally, if I can put a SRO on mine, I would. Because I'm with you, despite what and that's why like there's a lot of stigma that we can get into of like what the internet says versus what reality is sometimes, because I think a bigger window is better. A lot of people will just say, well, if you learn how to shoot, if you present your gun straight, it's going to be in the same place every time. Well, I'm like, well, maybe I'm just not that good. Maybe I suck, but I like the bigger window. So
cool. I love it. Thank you for coming on, Peter, and helping to share all this information. Plus, you saved me like several future texts of people who are going to say to me, hey, Scott, I know you shoot. What's a good carry gun? We had one guy that's just moving from Canada. He was like, I'm moving from Canada. My gal and I are coming down here. The first thing I need to do after we get a house is I need to go buy my concealed carry. And I was like, right on, man. That's a way to integrate into the society.
You're still going to get those texts, but we can refer them to this podcast now, and we'll be good to go.
Yes. All right. So listen, guys. Like I said, you know, at the start, this is not to sell anything, but we definitely, I want to tell you, go follow Peter over at Instagram, and you can also follow Northeast Munitions. And like you said, man, if you had any questions for you guys, drop Peter a DM and leave us freaking comments. I want to know what you guys think about this. Completely different than what we normally do. And also too, if you've watched this whole thing and you are from the gun community, you're not one of us, you're not like from the bodybuilding community, you're not already a follower of the bodybuilding podcasts, I want to know that you found this podcast. So please comment and let us know that. Plus likes, subscribes, shares, all that stuff. We do have several bodybuilding podcasts that come out each week. So we'd love to have you around for all of that. And Peter, I know you're just doing the thing you do from 9 to 5 every day here. I appreciate you taking the time to do it for free with us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Scott. I can talk guns all day, so anytime you want to have me back on, we are down.
All right, guys, we'll see you soon.